welcome to the Integrate This podcast. I am Jeremy Mikla, and I'm joined, as always, by co-host David Berner. And we're bringing a special guest with us into the conversation today. Her name is Jen Ivers. Jen is a teacher, an instructional coach, and instructional technology. I'll let you elaborate on exactly what that role is in Orono Public Schools. Which is, for those of you not from Minnesota, it would be a metro area school. And we heard some great things that Jen was presenting at a network meeting for a group called Mingaya, the Minnesota Generative AI Alliance, that Jen had shared some amazing things with what she's doing both in the classroom and working with her fellow teachers. That just, I think, sheds a very important light onto the conversation of assessment and authentic assessment in the age of AI. So, Jen, really welcome to the program. We're super glad to have you.
Thanks for having me.
So, Jen, why don't you kind of give us a little bit of the background story of you, like how you got, in your role in education and how you kind of progressed from the classroom into what it is you're doing today.
So I went to the University of San Diego where I got my teaching license, and I actually started teaching out in California. And I started teaching at a school that had actually received a SIG grant they had been considered underperforming for 10 years. And so I was hired as a part of a turnaround team. And I just had incredible mentors and amazing administration. And I sort of entered teaching in a time where we were really thinking about assessment, like what is an authentic assessment? How might we approach standards-based grading? So even from my first teaching experience, I sort of had the privilege of entering a system that was starting to question our assessment practices in a way that I think was really helpful as a young teacher. And so I taught there for a few years and I moved back to Minnesota where I'm originally from. And I have 3 teaching licenses. I've taught English language arts, I've taught English language learners, and then reading intervention. So I have a passion for literacy and teaching students to read and write and create. And then over time, I started to sort of step into roles in our building, like our instructional leadership team, and supporting teachers in their PLCs. And so it's in that process that I made my way sort of out of the classroom. I'm still a little bit in. I just don't really know if I can give it up. So I teach 2 periods of the day. And then the rest of my day, my building calls me an instructional development facilitator. But I kind of just wear a lot of different hats. Like I support some of the work of our digital literacy specialists. I support some of our MTSS processes. I help in PLC work and professional development. So I'm sort of like a multi-purpose tool in the other part of my day. So that's sort of how I made my way. And then I've been really lucky to be nurtured by our technology department. Just kind of anytime they've had professional development or opportunities to travel and learn, like going to ISTE, Sean Beaverson, who's our director of technology, has just been like just an amazing mentor. And so that's sort of how I came to work more closely with our technology team. But I always sort of joke, like I have no background in technology. So in terms of my expertise, it's just been learned on the job and not an expert, but like all of what I bring to my classroom is really a gift from the experts around me. So, yeah.
Well, and if her last name sounds a little bit familiar, if you have followed the podcast for a little while here, Jen's husband Paul was a previous guest on our show, and so we were glad to extend the invitation to you and to bring you in to bring your own unique perspective to this, right? Because, like you said, not coming from necessarily the perspective of technology, but yet we're the Integrate This podcast, right? So we want to find out how can technology be brought forward in a very practical way to help improve the learning environments for all of our students. And I think definitely the instructional practices that you use and the assessments that you bring, definitely, companion or pair really well to make good companions with the technology pieces here. So one of the things though that you kind of touched on here a little bit, but maybe you can go into it a little bit more. Like you had mentioned, like you entered into teaching at a time when assessments already seem to be broken, right? What do you think were some of those frustrations? And do you see a role for technology in some way to do something to help bring about a necessary change?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. I do think, like, prior to kind of the acceleration of AI in our workspace, I think that assessment practices, there were so many that maybe we can reflect back on now and say, like, wow, that was probably not best practice, right? Or we were doing the best we could with what we knew. But that idea of like, once we know better, we should do better, I think was really where I began my teaching, kind of where I had mentors saying, like, we're sick of the multiple choice test that goes with this beautiful work of literature, or I don't want students to regurgitate exactly what I thought about this book in an essay that's 5 paragraphs, right? Or even practices like giving a lot of feedback after an essay is turned in, where like the writing process is over and it's like an autopsy versus being able to help along the way. So I think about all of those practices, and many of which I experienced as a student myself, and really started questioning, like, what is the purpose of assessing the skill in this way? And do I have to assess these standards in this way, right? Because the standard will say, like, a student can trace a theme across a text, but there are a lot of ways for a student to maybe describe how a theme comes across a text, and maybe working alone or collaboratively. So I think some of this idea of the brokenness was really asking, like, what will these students need to be adults that are engaged and effective in our world? And how can assessment encourage, foster, and help develop those skills, the aptitudes, the dispositions of those highly effective adults? And so it's sort of in that reflection that we asked, like, how do we need to change the format of this test, or this assessment, I should say, in order to get there, to get to that meaningful work? And I think also when I started teaching, we were sort of saying, like, we don't know what jobs our students will have, right? We think about like how careers have changed. And for some, that felt really overwhelming. Like, well, if I don't know what job they're going to do or have, how can I prepare them for that? And I think that's where we started to say, like, we may never know, but we do know the skills that employers are looking for when it comes to collaboration and communication. And those are things we can foster with our assessments. So it's sort of in rethinking that design and thinking about how our practice could really meet the demands of the students, of the world the students were going to enter, and just like help them rise to those demands as they leave our building. So I think when I think about how technology plays a role in that, I think about how some of the work with AI has just accelerated our work, in maybe it's accelerated our need to revisit old practices and rethink them. Maybe it's accelerated how we can reinvent assessment. And so, like, I think both of those things are really exciting work, and it's the work we're going to continue to do. So I think we're sort of on that precipice of really seeing this continue to unfold in powerful ways for students.
Yeah, and I think along with like what you're saying there, I think like AI brings about this ability to be able to kind of like shine a light on some of those practices that like maybe we had taken for granted, or maybe kind of put too much credit into. It could be on either side of that, or at the same time to really help us broaden what it means to do authentic assessments that are more personalized to each individual student, because I think AI can really help bring about some of that personalization that could go into it as well.
Absolutely. And when we think about those kind of the career trajectory, and like
Yeah.
that personalization is so important, because then students can see relevance in what we're doing here. It can be connected to that kind of where they're aiming to go, right? They're going to end up in different places, and that personalization piece helps to bring about the relevance.
And it can be almost cyclical because that relevance and that might even lead to more engagement from that student, and they'll feel more agency in their own learning. And then it just kind of, the cycle can kind of keep repeating itself.
Absolutely.
Jen, could I have you focus on the authentic piece for just a bit? And because one of the things that we found over the last couple of years is there are people are approaching AI in so many different ways. And so the way that they partner with AI, how would you say that you can, what does authentic mean when you're partnering with AI? And maybe if it helps just to focus specifically on like student use for right now, but when they step up to a computer, the biggest concern, right, is the loss of their own voice, or the giving everything over to the machine so that it produces everything. So how do we maintain authenticity when we're partnering with AI?
It's a great question. When I think about my students stepping up to their computer and engaging with AI, I think about their agency being and their discernment being so important to that question of how are they engaging in a way that's authentic, or that they don't lose their own authentic voice. So when we began this school year, in order to kind of preemptively prepare for that moment, I decided to begin the year by teaching students more about how their brains develop, how are the neural pathways developing, why is it that learning is initially hard? Because, so often when it's challenging, it's like, okay, well, what tool or what resource could I outsource this to if needed? And I wanted to make sure that they were able to make decisions about what they outsource and really strategically, so that they weren't outsourcing opportunities to share their unique idea in a beautiful way that's creative and totally their own. Or to say, you know what, the goal of this task I'm doing is this, so I can use AI in this way without threatening my autonomy and my agency. So we spent time talking about how the brain develops, how their neural pathways connect. And then when we approached AI, I simply asked them, for each task, when we brought AI as a thought partner, I said, what's the skill you're developing or the neural pathway you're developing? How can AI help you in this moment? And then in what ways do we need to do some of this work independently or with a partner that's a human, versus AI, so they could be really strategic about not outsourcing the most important part of their learning or the most beautiful part of their experience or their creativity. So I really think about pulling the curtain back and helping students to become more discerning users of, really any technology. Like, it doesn't have to just be AI, but asking like, what is my goal? What is my learning goal? What do I care about here? And then how can I engage with this tool in a way that's really strategic, so I don't lose who I am in this process? So I don't know if that totally answers your question, but maybe I'm touching on it.
Yeah, I think like giving them opportunities to, like you said, discern for themselves, like through use of it, what's good about it and what's not. The one thing that, if you could kind of connect to this, is we've had a lot of different use scales that have come out. And so like assessment scales, or like the stoplight is one of the most well-known ones, but now is kind of shunned. But could you talk a little bit just about like the connection between students having, when they partner with AI and learning about those different use cases, how much do the guardrails that we set up get in the way of that? Because we do have a lot of these different models coming out, and it's maybe a little bit hard to discern like what the right answer is, even though many of us are searching for the right framework or answer or things like that. Could you talk a little bit about that and how much we should be investing in those when it comes to student use?
Yeah, that's a great follow-up question. We did develop a scale here with our kind of emerging technology cohort of teachers, and Predominantly, it was to give teachers language to use with students, right? So it was kind of this time of teachers feeling really overwhelmed and not knowing like how to nurture student use and how to show them where boundaries are and how to navigate which tool for what purpose at what time and how much. And so I think of it as a scaffold. But then as I used it, I realized like even for myself, I'm all over the scale. Like there's like a single project where I'm like sort of in yellow and then I'm also in red and then I'm up here to green. And it was like maybe not sophisticated enough for how I really use AI personally, like as a professional. And that really made me consider like how I use it with my students, because I thought, well, if I'm experiencing this, they may also feel at times like the scale is not really fitting for the purpose or the task. So I would say I don't have a good answer. I don't know to what degree that scale will continue to be really important or will diminish. I suspect it will become less important as we start to feel more competent with showing and teaching students the boundaries and the nuances and how we ebb and flow between different uses and of maybe our LLM of choice, or maybe multiple, because often I'm hopping between several. So I think like we'll gain competency in that, and maybe that competency will help us to demonstrate more of the nuance for our students. I spend less time worried that they know the exact scale or that they know exactly the boundaries of it. And I spend more time interested in how they're thinking about their choices, how they're articulating their choices, and how they're developing their own like internal sense of integrity and competence with the tool. And I think that that's maybe the ideal, and the scale is a scaffold to get there. So I suspect it will become less important, I hope, as our competency increases and my students become even more metacognitive about their work.
Yeah, and it sounds like the main thing here is to leave a lot of room for flexibility and nuance, because with how complex a lesson could be and all the different pieces that go into it, you almost have to allow for that. So it's and I don't think that some of the frameworks are necessarily trying to box us in, but I think we could maybe do that to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
I know like for myself, like I kind of sometimes can think rigidly, so that I'm like, okay, so these certain things should only be in this category and, stuff like that. But
yeah, absolutely. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. No, I do appreciate, we've talked to you and some others recently too, that really emphasize that need for the flexibility, which I think is good for me to think about and talk with others about. So
yeah, I think as a teacher, we sort of have to ebb and flow between the structure that gives our lessons and our plans meaning, right? Like, I know you're going to get to this end goal. I know you're going to be able to demonstrate these competencies and these skills, and I can ensure that, right? Like, that's my job here in this year of ninth grade English. And then the flexibility to respond to their needs, their need to know more about a tool and their interest in this subject. And we ebb and flow between kind of having to be extremely responsive and flexible, and then having to still have enough structure that you're going to make sure all students gain the skills and competencies they need. Teaching is so complicated. When we talk about it in this way, I'm just reminded, like, every time I work with an educator, how much they're really managing in and how flexible you have to be in your disposition while also maintaining an appropriate amount of structure. That's hard, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I want us to pivot here a little bit, because I think we've been looking and talking about a lot of big picture things so far, right? The theoretical stuff, but I want to make this really practical and purposeful at the same time. So I'm going to read a quote of yours here, and it's a quote in the form of a question. But you say, "What would happen if we transformed our classrooms into a writing studio in which our students pitched a coming-of-age television series to a showrunner?" And I think it brings in this idea of, are we focused on what that end product is? Are we focused on the process that a student takes in their learning journey to maybe get to that point. And I think it brings us into that practical part of, you have this great idea here for this writer's room to help students kind of develop a comedy sketch or a sitcom type of a pitch, which to me demonstrates their learning about the theme of coming of age in a way that, goes way beyond what a 5-paragraph essay, for example, could do. So can you elaborate a little bit on this idea and the process?
Yeah, absolutely. I work on an incredible PLC. So I'll say that, I believe so much in the power of teachers coming together and sharing what they're uniquely gifted at. So our PLC came together, and there is just a lot of trust and a lot of expertise on that PLC. And so we sat down, and part of the impetus for this unit was that we got rid of a text from our curriculum. And we needed to change this unit. And we felt that the old version of assessment was falling into some of those traps we've already mentioned, and just felt less inspired. So together, we just asked, in the world, where will our students really experience coming of age storytelling, and where will they how will these skills resonate with them as adults? And so we thought about how popular coming of age television is, and just how much we've enjoyed it as we came of age, and even as adults, the kind of series that have been really compelling. And we said, wouldn't it be cool if we just thought about our classrooms differently for the next 3 or 4 weeks, and created kind of a writing studio where students would come together and would essentially develop a coming of age pitch for us for a series. So they develop that pitch, they storyboard the pilot episode, they pull together casting and costumes and filming locations, they make trailers, and they even add a script, a reading of that script, and a persuasive pitch at the end. I wasn't going to say speech, would be too dramatic. It's shorter than that. But we got so excited about this idea. So when you ask kind of where did this start, it's all of a sudden, it wasn't the kind of drain where oh gosh, I have to write a multiple choice test and you dread it because it's just not inspiring at all. And it's not fun for you, and it's not fun for them to take it. And then when you grade it, you kind of wonder, was this the best way to show these skills? And instead, I think we just felt so inspired by the idea that all of a sudden we're pulling exemplars from the real world. We're showing them, television trailers from shows they currently watch and looking at it more analytically. Sorry about that bell. But when you think about this unit and this assessment, it really was just a question of do we feel that we could change the format? And we felt we had permission to do that. We felt we were trusted as a PLC to make a really good decision about how we could assess them differently. So that trust was there. We had each other to come to the table and to bring unique ideas about this project. And then from there, we curated resources that would help us to make our classrooms into that writing studio. And then bringing it into the classroom, we learned more and more each time we did it about what worked and what didn't and how we would tweak it. And so I think over time it's felt more inspired than that first iteration. And that's exciting too, because over time you don't want that curriculum to get stale or dry. You want to keep innovating and making sure it's meeting their needs. But this has been one that I look forward to every year as a teacher. And how different is that than feeling maybe the stress over having to grade a bunch of essays, right? I think about how excited I am to see their final pitches and how special it is to watch them collaborate and then really show us what they can do at the end there.
I know one of the things when I present to teachers about AI, that I always try to make sure is at the forefront of every discussion that we have, is that the human intelligence is always greater than the artificial intelligence. And I really see that in how you discuss how this was a PLC project with fellow teachers, and how the coming together of this human intelligence has really led to, something that's really been able to develop and expand. And something, obviously, I could see a lot of passion that you have for this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And even the examples that we bring in are like Pixar, right? They're like television shows that are on network television now. And something that's beautiful about that is like, think about the human intelligence that came together and the creativity to make those. And so I think like it is really celebratory of assessment that asks like, how can we nurture human intelligence and creativity, and then how can we bring the tools to the table that help us to do that without losing what's uniquely human or what's really special about that work in collaboration and the interdependence of the teamwork, right?
Yeah, perfect. You're going exactly the direction that I want to follow up here with then. What is the role of AI? Where does AI fit in, and where doesn't it in this type of a project or process?
Yeah. So we, one of the things we do is we show them a clip of the writer's room for The Office, and they learn about the blue sky period. And this is a period in writing or in a writer's room where like anything goes, right? They're just throwing out ideas, they're brainstorming. It's really early days in the project. And this is a time where we ask them to think about bringing AI because it's so good at generating ideas, but they're so good at discerning like what's really going to hit their target audience, and so many of them build television series that are really for teenagers, which is heartening, like, because they know themselves, they know their audience. And so I think it's fun to see them use AI, certainly at that point, to generate ideas and then to sit and like hash out which were quality, which do they want to build on, and which of those ideas should they like absolutely abandon. So that's like one way that they engage AI early in that process. I would say that also later they do some AI image generation and kind of learn a little bit more about like character consistency on their storyboards. And so that's a helpful part of the process because we get to work with them on how they prompt and how they think about getting that story storyboarded well so their audience can understand it or the showrunner can understand it and hopefully choose their show. But I think of it really as a thought partner and then at times a creative partner, like with that AI image generation. But they have each other as well. And so there's kind of this mix of like students working with each other, students working with AI, students working with me. It's really organic. Like there wasn't one day where it was like, today you use Gemini and tomorrow you don't. It was so fluid and really based on the task at hand and the purpose of that task.
Did anything majorly surprise you about how a student use of AI made it into their into their pitch or into their pilot?
That's a good question. No, but there were some funny moments. Like I went over to one student and this unit, and I guess to that point, the scale, allowed me to really start having conversations with them about how they're using AI. Like we had a lot of trust. It was no longer like, oh, she's coming, let me hide it. It was like, they knew I was going to ask them how they were prompting and what they were doing. And so I went over to a student and she had on her slideshow like four squares and she was trying to add something to it. And I said, hey, can you tell me more about like how you just prompted Gemini here? And she wrote, oh, I asked for 4 big ideas because I have 4 spaces on my slideshow. And I kind of giggled because I was like, hey, one thing you could do is ask for like 10 ideas, so you can find the ones that might be worth exploring and she was just blown away by my suggestion. So it was very endearing. Like you just come to see like how they're engaging with that tool and how they're thinking about its use. And then when you kind of tell them like, well, actually it could do this. I'm like, it wasn't a great suggestion by me, but it really blew her mind to think like, oh yeah, of course. Like I should ask for more so I can be the one to do some of the curating.
And now you're the smartest teacher ever.
Oh yeah. It was like I blew her mind, but I laughed because I was like, that is that wasn't my highest quality prompt there for her. Or like I had one student who put the rubric in at the end and had Gemini kind of assess where they were on the rubric, and it gave some bad feedback, or just like feedback I wouldn't have attended to. And when she explained it to me, she was like, well, I guess I have to change the project. And I was like, no, of course you don't. Like, if you don't think that is sound feedback, like by all means, like you can ask it to elaborate or give examples of why, but like you don't have to commit to that change because it suggested it. So I don't know that anything surprised me in what turned up in their final project, but I think that the conversations we had at times were so illuminating about how they're thinking about the tool and just being able to nurture their thinking about AI.
Can we dive in a little bit more to that? Like for at first here, I guess, just looking at what are you finding with students and prompt writing? Because one of the things that comes out constantly, especially when new models of AI tools come out, there's prompt frameworks that you can use to really design your prompt and have a fully fleshed out prompt. And my thing with that is I always when I do my trainings, I kind of talk about how it's helpful to you because you can get out a lot of details of where you want the AI to go, and then you don't end up like wasting a bunch of time because you're trying to get it to do what you want, but it's not quite getting there. And I work with adult learners a lot more, but from the student aspect, what are you seeing with like their first exposures to prompting? And then maybe even touching on, like, if you have a specific example, that'd be great, but a student that maybe started really with short prompts or something and kind of moved towards more complex prompts. Have you seen any of that, or can you talk about any of that?
Yeah, I can say that it has most often illuminated their understanding of the task at hand. Like when I see them prompt, sometimes I can spot right away that they maybe have a misunderstanding about what the final product should look like or what they're going for. And that's been helpful because then I can do some reteaching about the objective of that lesson or the learning goal for the student, and then they can go back to it and iterate. So that has been one way that I've seen prompting kind of provide me quick feedback about whether they understand the task or not. In terms of like engineering prompting, there is such a great connection to what we do when we write. I think about students reading and writing and thinking about rhetoric and understanding audience and context and purpose and tone. And so one of the things that's been helpful is they like Raft is a strategy we use. If maybe you've heard of it, but it's so students can analyze like the role, the audience, right, the format and the purpose of a text or something we're studying. And that has been a really helpful kind of a transfer skill when it comes to prompting. It's just helping them to consider what they can provide to get a better first response from their the LLM that they're using here, Gemini. So I don't have a super concrete example right now of where it started maybe short and it ended more in depth or more purposeful. I can say that transfer skill has made it so much easier for me to help them understand why we are maybe going to think more carefully about our prompts and then get something of much better quality when we do that. So I'm grateful that skill is really transferable from like English language arts text analysis to engineering a prompt.
Yeah, and that's great too. That's a great example. Like we are still you're communicating with these programs, and the more information you can give it, the better off it's going to perform. And then I would say too, like this kind of goes back to our other conversation about the assessment side, where you have nuance with even the frameworks, because some frameworks are going to lend themselves to certain tasks and others are not. And you can, as a student or just any user really, you always kind of have to discern, right? Do you need to include tone or anything like that? Like you almost have to figure that out as you are constructing it.
Yeah, I do share with them. I try as best I can to model what we're talking about with students. So like if I go and prompt it the first time, kind of showing them and talking to them about what I'm thinking as I'm doing it. One of the things I have noticed though is I will share with them, like if I have a pretty good idea of what I want, I am going to spend more time engineering that prompt so I can get what I want and get going. If I am like in an exploratory, maybe uncertain place, sometimes I start with some shorter prompts and sometimes I abandon them. I'm like, oh nope, that's not where I wanted to be. And that's been helpful to show them as well. Like it's really again metacognitive. It's like, what do I know about this? How much do I know about this? What place in my learning process am I? Am I just brainstorming and I'm in that blue sky period? And, like, okay, then maybe it's a little more exploratory. Maybe I have a lot of clarity on my direction, my purpose, my tools. Okay, now it's probably worth it for me to spend more time engineering something that's going to be a higher quality. So it's interesting too how much this relates to their executive functioning, their sense of prioritizing tasks, breaking them down, understanding time management and task complexity. So but again, like these are such worthy things to be addressing in your class. I mean, of course I care about English language arts, but my goodness, if I'm fostering students who have a greater sense of whether tone is appropriate to address in this prompt or not, or, if how much time and expertise they have in something and therefore how they're going to go about using the tool, I feel a lot better about that, sending that a future adult into our world, knowing that they're going to have a disposition of an adult who can be reflective and then be extremely purposeful.
And I have one more question too on that. What have you noticed in terms of student to student collaboration? Maybe have you seen any organic student to student collaboration? Like if, for example, if a student's trying to work with something and trying to construct a prompt, and then just naturally it happens that one student will help another with maybe a different way to approach a prompt to get a different answer. What have you seen as far as that goes with organic collaboration?
Well, I can say like there's a very endearing memory I have of using a chatbot for the first time in my classroom, where I had a student who spoke French, and he was very much a level 1 EL. And I didn't really know how the chatbot was going to go in general. Like it was very new to me. This was like maybe 2 years ago now. And a student just sort of hollered across the classroom, like, hey, so-and-so, tell it to speak French. And then the student did. And then suddenly he was like engaging with this. It was like William Shakespeare. I made like a chatbot of William Shakespeare before we read Romeo and Juliet. And now all of a sudden Shakespeare is bantering with my student in French. And I was just so heartened by the one student just saying like, oh, like this, it can do this. This would really benefit my friend over here who, as an English learner and as a level 1, is already facing some challenges with communicating with the students and feeling like a part of our community. So I think like that's probably one of the ones that stays with me in terms of like the most organic way they've just like been able to look out for one another and said, hey, try this, and seen that be really successful, both then for the student and just in building a really safe and welcoming learning environment.
Yeah, and I think you're definitely talking about, these experiences that you're helping to create for the students. Kudos for that, and I think it's just that's what a student is going to remember long after the class is over. Is they're going to remember a lot of what took place in the process, right, of that learning. And and it's really amazing with, I think, what you're doing in your English language arts classes. But so how can this be more scalable, right? How can this become more doable for non-ELA teachers, the social studies teacher, the health teacher, the third grade teacher, that wants to bring these types of experiences to their students? What would you recommend that a teacher do that's wanting to embark upon that?
I have two beliefs I hold very strongly here about this. And the first is that like your PLC can be a powerful source of creativity and ingenuity. And so I think like and hope, hopefully people can find a community, even if you're working in a small district, but maybe, getting on a Google Meet with a teacher working in another district, but like collaborate with your colleagues, even interdepartmental, right? Or cross-departmental, so that you can hear what other people are doing and maybe go and see it, right? Like go in and watch, have them share their lessons with you, talk about it, debrief. But I really think that because we already see the PLC model as a vehicle for like, highly effective tier 1 instruction, certainly like this is a great place to collaborate. Like that's a collaborative group, like collaborate and work together to assess like, where are the parts in our curriculum or in our student experience that we just feel could be more engaging, more inspired, more lively for us and for the, most importantly, for the students. And the other is ask for help. Like I have just never been turned down. This is kind of how I ended up working more closely with our technology department, but we have had digital learning specialists here. And I just asked them to come into my classroom, like as often as they would. Oh, maybe I like to an obnoxious amount, but like, I just thought to myself, like, we have resources. So hopefully if you have resources like a specialist on your campus, reach out, because I mean, everything I've shared here didn't start with me. It started by being inspired by others and collaborating with others, but having those specialists come into my classroom, watch me teach, I watch them teach, interacting with my students, opening my door has transformed my teaching tremendously. And I think, especially at the high school level, sometimes it can be really closed door. We're overwhelmed. There's a lot going on. You're managing maybe 120 plus students. And so I would just say, like, lean on the PLC to help scale this work, because I think this is very possible if you bring together, like so much is possible when we bring together our teachers. They have so much to offer each other. So that and opening your doors.
And your experience with the PLC is fantastic. We had a guest on, Dr. Fons Mendoza, who used the PLC in his experience to mean please learn compliance.
Oh, that's so sad.
Very sad. Yeah. But I think the second, so if you are in such a PLC, because it's not always your choice which PLCs you kind of get put into in every district, it varies, right? But that second part of what you said, if you're not getting what you need out of that first group, find another group. Ask questions, seek out people who have knowledge that you would like to glean from, and I think also be willing to share what you've been doing with others. It makes you vulnerable, but it also is going to allow that door or that window into kind of your style, your way of teaching that can really might be shareable, or it might bring in something brand new that you haven't thought of before. And I think making those connections, and I think, I think as long as David and I have been doing this now, nobody says no. Like, have we had, David, a guest that we've approached that told us, no, I don't want to come on your show? I just don't think that that's the education world, at least the people that we want to be associated with.
Yeah, I have never had someone say no to me when I said, hey, I need some help, or, hey, I want to just like get better at this, or I want to be more comfortable with this. Like, I just have never had a teacher or a specialist say, no, I won't help you. And like, we're asking our students every day to be vulnerable, to work with people they don't feel comfortable with, to sometimes do activities that feel compliance driven. So I think like, maybe trying to live out in your experience as a professional what you're asking of your students, which is to stretch, be vulnerable, and make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes in the process, but that's the other piece of like bringing others to the table. When I'm going to try something new, like that chatbot for the first time, I didn't do it in isolation. I talked to my PLC, I talked to a specialist, I actually invited a specialist into my classroom just so that I had other eyes, other hands, other support in that moment. So I know that not everybody has the same experience of PLC or the level of resources, but I think that like there is so much we can do when we share with one another. So to whatever degree you can collaborate with others and share, that's, I think, how we scale this work.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, reaching out to those people, you talked about that, and you don't have to know all of the answers to do that. I know you've talked, and after seeing your presentation, which I know we will link in the show description, but you even talk about how you go into this idea of trying to close feedback loops, right? And bringing technology into that to help do that with things like apps scripts or Gemini Gems or AI Studio. And I can't imagine that those were, like completely understood by you the very first time that you looked upon them. And, like how it seeking out the advice of the others, or if you don't have that person that you can immediately go to, there you're not going to break anything, right? Just by diving in and trying something out, if it doesn't get you the result that you want, well, now you're going to do something different next time.
Totally. And
Nothing will break.
exactly. And you're still going to act with integrity, right? Like I think about this a lot, like with our students, even engaging with AI, it's like, start with your sense of integrity, start with your sense of like what you know to believe to be good practice with whatever task you're doing or whatever you're doing. And that's what I think about with teaching. Like, I believe I can act with integrity as a teacher, and I believe I know best practice. So if I'm then going to try something new, I start with that, and then I bring others to the table to help me, when I'm doing something that's really uncertain or I'm, really new to me. But to that end, some of the early days of using like Autocrat or app scripting, like, I mean, if you had told me 15 years ago when I started teaching that I would be engaging with any of these resources or like in partnership with my PLC, it would feel insane at that time. So I think, like, to that end, bringing experts to the table, like I can't tell you how much I've learned from my digital learning specialists and from Sean, our coordinator. So
I think that's a good spot to kind of wrap things up with here. I really love this idea of, the integrity piece and that you touched on there. But let's move then into kind of our show ender here, where we bring in the lightning round questions. And if you've listened before, you maybe have an idea of some of them that are coming. But we like to encourage our guests to respond however they feel. If it's a one-word answer, then that's great. We'll, but if it's something that you think like sparks a story or a conversation that goes a little bit longer, that's totally fine too. So I think, David, are you going to kick us off here with the first of the lightning round questions?
Yeah, we can do that. So Jen, what's one assessment practice you're officially done with?
Timed assessments. I just have no interest. I want to know how you think deeply and how you come to understand or create, but I just have no interest in some artificial sense that like something needs to be done in 50 minutes and that's going to determine your proficiency. So I'm all done with timed assessments.
What's one AI use that actually saved you time this school year so far?
It's hard to choose just one. I'm going to choose two. I'm going to break the rule. NotebookLM. I'm getting my doctorate, and NotebookLM is my hero of the year. I don't know how I would do any of what I'm doing without NotebookLM. So that for me personally and for graduate school has been incredible. And then Gemini to make the app scripts that have helped us close the feedback loop, because the amount of time I'm saving myself on providing feedback that used to take, so much time is incredible. So both of those are home runs.
All right. So this next question involves your husband, Paul, who's been on the show, as Jeremy mentioned. But you work both in the same district, and Paul is in the instructional technology role. So we want to know, are your family dinners tech infused, low tech, or no tech?
We work very closely. In fact, I can see his office from my office. We had a meeting earlier today. So our lives are very enmeshed between work and home. It depends. We have a 7-year-old, and so most of our dinners kind of revolve around Pokemon, and trying to get him to finish his dinner. And I would say infused, probably medium, right? Like, so sometimes we're tech confused, sometimes not. One funny experience just in our home of late is we cannot get our son to stop calling it a smart board. So every time he says something about his teacher using the smart board, both Paul and I almost in sync will be like, the ViewSonic, you mean the ViewSonic? Our poor child, he also got a book. It was like Adventures in the Amazon. And when he opened it up, he was like, oh, I thought this was going to be about the internet. But it, truly about the real Amazon. So Paul and I had to really take a reflective moment at that point and ask like if maybe we needed to turn down the tech in our home.
Hey, and don't worry about the Pokemon thing. I have a 22-year-old, almost 23-year-old who's still very into Pokemon, and I'd say he's turned out okay.
It's a real commitment right now in our house to Pokemon.
And it still is for the older kids too. Let's think about the writer's room project for a moment. What's one thing that you would hope a student remembers from that project years later when maybe they're at a 20-year reunion, say, and they bring up your class and that particular project? What do you want them to remember from that?
We have so much joy in watching the trailers that they make, and in seeing like how close they get to something that can look like pretty professional, and just they've infused their personalities and their humor. So I would say like it's really that kind of way it builds for us community. It builds inside jokes that we use the rest of the year, but just like how impressive they are. Like as ninth graders, they make things that just absolutely blow my mind in terms of quality. And I really think it speaks to like their creativity and their ability to collaborate. So I'm just like, I really hope they remember the joy of that.
And does there happen to be a show called 6-7 coming out at some point?
It did not turn up this year. I fear that for our future. Yes. But luckily not this year.
All right. I was just curious because it's,
it is
pretty popular. So the next question, if you could drop into any teacher's classroom for one day of co-teaching, who would you pick and why?
I've never been asked that question before. As a teacher of English language arts, I love poetry. And so Mark Doty, who is an American poet and a professor, he does this. His work is very much about precision in language and attention. And like we honor people, things, experiences by using extraordinarily precise language to describe them. And I think about that in contrast sometimes with AI, that like AI is often the average of all of the sentences, right? And I don't think these have to be opposing or really thought of as kind of, it's just I use them to measure sort of how I approach my work. Like, where do I need to be precise and honor something with my own language and my ideas, right? And I just think his work is so inspiring to me. And so yeah, Mark Doty, I would join one of his college courses and then I would ask him a lot of questions about what he thinks of AI.
And one final one. So you're walking into a staff development meeting or you're walking into your PLC and you're just feeling super pumped and motivated to get some serious work done. What's the soundtrack playing in your mind? Or you maybe would literally play it too. I don't know.
Oh gosh. Yeah. Oh, this is hard. Embarrassingly, I think Victorious by Panic at the Disco, but not, I probably wouldn't play it aloud here at school, but yeah, I think like that's what I would have on my mind.
That's awesome. Well, Jen, I just want to thank you again so much for your time and sharing your wonderful insights with us and with the audience. And, I wish you, we're recording here before the holidays. So, and you got a big break coming up here. So I hope you have a safe and happy holiday time period. And we look forward to catching up with you again soon.
Oh, thank you both for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Jen.